I took 3 little pumpkins out of my shopping cart and placed them on the conveyor toward the cashier, and then just began to unload my other groceries. The clerk said, "I bought some of these yesterday." At this point, I had a choice. I could choose to not look up while I unloaded my groceries and pretend I didn't hear her. Or I could engage with her comment. For some reason, she saw me frazzled at that time and decided I was a kindred spirit because of my pumpkins. Was I a little out of sorts in that moment? I have to admit I was. But I decided I'm going to look up and say something back. After all, how I was feeling wasn't her fault. So I said, "Oh, that's nice." But she continued to talk as she checked out my groceries, and I learned about her 5-year-old grandson who had come for dinner the night before. "I have a planter shaped like a truck just for him. We decorate it for the different seasons," she said proudly. And then she told me that her son and his wife were separated, and he brings the little boy over when he can, even though it's an hour away, to have dinner and some much needed grandma time. She told me that after dinner, he arranged and rearranged the pumpkins and fall leaves in his planter as a 5-year-old will do. So after hearing her story, I said, "Sounds like that was money well spent on those pumpkins." She broke into a big smile and said, "Yes, it was." Well, I left the store with a big smile on my face too, visualizing that boy with his pumpkins. And it was not lost on me that grandma was on her feet all day checking out people's groceries so she could buy those pumpkins for her grandson, as well as the ingredients for a sustaining meal for her fractured little family. And I felt sheepish. Sheepish that I had just loaded my cart with anything I wanted and I hadn't thought about the cost. So as I put my bags in my car, I said, "Thank you for all my many blessings, for that grandma, the little boy, the dad, and of course, for the 3 pumpkins." Kindness and civility are like that. Myriad opportunities pop up throughout our day to be kind and civil to the people with whom we interact. How we respond in these moments is a choice. A choice. Are we aware of the choices we make? Can we intentionally notice these opportunities and decide how we will respond? Yes. Yes, I believe we can do that. And do these choices make a difference in the lives of others? Why, yes. Yes, I believe they do. John Pavlovitz is a Christian blogger, progressive Christian blogger, author, and pastor. And he puts it this way in a book that just came out this week. He says, "We can live in the midst of spiritual and emotional trauma, knowing that our meager offerings, although seemingly insufficient, can change the situation." He knows what he's talking about. As a matter of fact, right now, John, who's only 51 years old, is in an ICU in North Carolina recovering from the removal of a pituitary brain tumor just last Friday. He's doing well, thankfully, and is being carefully monitored. He puts his views in print and online, and so he's often targeted by others for hate speech and hate emails, especially from people within various faith communities. His response to all of that experience is summed up in the title of his new book, rather humorously. If God is love, don't be a jerk. But public figures are not the only ones subject to ugly talk and ugly actions. Melissa is one of the participating artists in my gallery, and she was recently telling me that friends of hers who run businesses in the town where she used to have a tie-dye shop are now closing their businesses after decades, even though they love what they do. Why? Because of rampant rudeness on the part of customers. It is just no longer worth it to them. I think we could all cite examples of being in a store or a restaurant or a sports venue when someone has acted out. And amazingly, they do so without embarrassment. And sadly, we have come to expect it as the new normal. We wish it wasn't that way, but we feel helpless, powerless. We do not have to cower in defeat, resorting to the Hallmark Channel for our only form of solace. Now, don't get defensive. Some escape is very good, and I know much needed in these stressful times. But it is not a solution. The solution, I believe, and affirm this day to you, is for us to claim and live the rock bottom truth at the heart of every one of the major religious traditions from which we draw strength and wisdom. And that is to treat others the way we want to be treated every day, even in the checkout line. Hear what John Pavlovitz says again. Our theology is unmasked in Christ's. The way we treat others is the most tangible and meaningful expression of our belief system. He is not telling others what to believe. He's way over that. I'm way over that. And my guess is you are too. He says instead that the current pressure cooker of circumstances in which we find ourselves is boiling us down to the bare essentials. And if that at that point, the beliefs we are left with provide us excuses for bad behavior and even encourage it, it is time for serious self-examination and correction. And I would add, if we find ourselves maybe feeling pretty good after some self-reflection, maybe we also need a check on our superior attitudes. Recently, we marked the 20th anniversary of the September 11th, 2001 attacks on our country. There were many poignant tributes to the victims, the survivors, and the heroes and heroines of that time. The next day, I saw a post on Facebook that grabbed my attention. It read simply, I want to go back to September 12th, 2001. Why did that strike such a chord with me? And maybe it does with you. Because at least for a few days and weeks, we were our better selves. Until, sadly, everyone went back to normal, whatever normal was in those days. In 2001, I was serving a church in suburban northern New Jersey, a town that was a bedroom community for many who worked in New York City. We were about 25 miles away, but ash fell on our streets. Cars remain unclaimed in the parking lot of our train station. The doors of all our downtown churches flew open wide and stayed open for conversation and sharing and meditation. Candles were lit. Boxes of tissues lined every pew. Meals were shared, hugs freely given, and prayers were said. That diverse religious community rallied around our Muslim and Sikh neighbors because their businesses were being either boycotted or ransacked. We came together as we had never had before to listen and learn from each other. The faith community wrote newspaper articles and opinion pieces in one voice, pleading for mutual understanding and respect. Together, we rallied around those businesses and welcomed their faith leaders into our houses of worship. It was a beautiful, challenging, and terrible time. So I could relate to the longing experienced in that Facebook post. Living through 9/11 so close to New York City gave me a clearer sense of empathy and clarity to what my parents, who were of the greatest generation, had been telling me all along. We have been living with an unprecedented attack, not just on the structures like we did on September 11th, but on the societal structures of how we live here in America for the last 40 years. What we experience now is not the cause, it's the fruit. It's the fruit of an unraveling of our social fabric until it, along with our sense of the common good, lies like scraps on the sewing room floor. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Our meager offerings, though seemingly insufficient, can change the situation. In the summer of 2002, I was given an invitation to go to the Chautauqua Institution. It's in Western New York. You may have heard of it. It's a place where for many weeks in the summer, people gather and are inspired by various speakers and have lovely cultural presentations around a lovely lake. It was there that I met the poet, Naomi Shihab Nye, for she was the writer poet in residence that week. And she is the author of the poem Kindness that I read for our meditation today. Just at that time, she had released a book of collected poems called 19 Varieties of Gazelle. In it, she had collected the poems she had written about the Middle East in response to the terrorism and the terrible prejudice of those times. She was uniquely situated to do that. She's the daughter of a Palestinian refugee father and an American mother. Her imagery is so evocative and beautiful. And I figured, since a central figure in my beliefs was a Palestinian refugee, there was certainly something I could learn from her. And the texts I hold sacred come out of that same cultural milieu. So I listened carefully to her stories and her poems, and I have treasured that slim volume along with others of her work these last 20 years. There are many references throughout the Hebrew and Christian scriptures about the necessity for kindness and hospitality and civility. They make a difference between life and death in a desert environment. Spiritual truths are made known in these seemingly simple stories about sharing meals, welcoming strangers, traveling. You and I may not live in a literal desert, but we live in a spiritual one. So I think her poem about Arab hospitality, which has stayed with me for 20 years, speaks to our current situation. And I hope you take it with you as I close with it today. The poem is entitled Red Brocade. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, where he's headed. That way, he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then, you'll be such good friends, you won't care. Let's go back to that. Rice? Pine nuts? My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy. That's the armor people put on to pretend they have a purpose in the world. I refuse to be claimed. Here, your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea. Yes, let's go back to that, because the way we treat others is the most tangible and meaningful expression of our belief system. Let's go back to that. Blessed be.